In June, we hosted a Rotary Foundation sensitization session where participants learned about the significance of the foundation and how giving to it makes clubs eligible for district grants. As a direct outcome, District 7030 has 14 clubs who are now eligible to apply for district grants. Tonight, as we continue our journey with grants, we are privileged to hear from two presenters with deep expertise in the field of grant writing. They will guide us through how to prepare a compelling proposal for submission to your respective districts, maximizing your chances for success, and how to develop a strong proposal for external funding, whether from charities, corporate sponsors, or other partners, so that those who are eligible for district grants this year are not left out. So, without further ado, it is my pleasure now to introduce this evening's presenters. I will start with Mr. Paul Ashby, who is the Assistant District Governor for Barbados. Paul Ashby is the Chief Executive Officer of Signia Globe Financial Group, Inc., a position he has held since June 2012. Under his leadership, he and his team have built a strong high-performance culture. Between 2016 and 2018, he successfully led the seamless amalgamation of Signia Financial and Globe Finance. With over 30 years of experience in the banking and finance industry, Mr. Ashby has held both local and regional roles during his tenure at CIBC First Caribbean International Bank, including branch manager, regional sales and service manager, regional marketing manager, product development manager, among others. In addition to his professional career, Mr. Ashby has been actively involved in community service. He has served extensively with JCI, including as president of the West Indies JCI, and he has also made significant impact in Rotary. He was president of the Rotary Club of Barbados, district secretary, assistant governor for District 7030, and he also serves on several boards on island. Outside of his work and service, Mr. Ashby enjoys playing and watching a wide variety of sports. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Ashby, Mr. Paul Ashby, to present this evening. We also have presenting this evening the president of the Rotary Club of Barbados South, Miss Jacklyn Broomes. Jacklyn Broomes is an agronomist by training and currently serves as a research manager at the Agronomy Research Department of the Barbados Agricultural Management Company, BAMC. Her career spans a range of leadership roles, including sustainability manager and agricultural manager at Mount Gay Distilleries, where she spearheaded initiatives that combined agricultural innovation with environmental stewardship. She holds a Bachelor of Science in General Agriculture and a Master of Philosophy in Crop Science from the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus. Jacklyn is currently pursuing her PhD with a research focus on identifying and characterizing this diverse sweet potato varieties cultivated across Barbados. In 2021, she was inducted into the Rotary Club of Barbados South and within a year was named Most Outstanding Rotarian. Her contributions to the club have been significant, having served as chair of the Owen Arthur AgriKids Initiative, director of membership, director of youth, and chair of fundraising during her time as president-elect. Since joining, she's been instrumental in securing grant funding from both private and public sector partners, helping to drive the club's strategic goals and impactful projects. In June 2025, Jacklyn was proudly installed as president of the Rotary Club of Barbados South for the 2025-26 Rotary year, continuing her steadfast commitment to the Rotary motto, service above self. She's driven by a passion of agriculture and profound dedication to people, and outside of her professional and volunteer commitments, she can be found dancing to soca, spending quality time with her cherished pets, and reconnecting with nature. So, you've heard it, two very well qualified presenters for this evening's session. And without any further ado, I now hand over to AG Paul, who will lead us into the first session.
Good evening, all. Thank you very much for your warm introduction, Graham, Director Graham. It is my pleasure to be participating in this activity this afternoon. And as I was preparing for it, I was thinking about some of the scars that I had in pursuing a global grant. And I feel much better that we're talking about district grants, which is a much easier process. But in the global grant arena, I've had the the good fortune of an audit from Rotary Foundation, and then I've also had the good fortune of, I call them good fortunes, of being in the way of another grant not being approved because a grant that I had responsibility for was held up for various reasons in reporting. So I'm hoping today to share with you some key elements of the grant process that are both applicable to district grants and global grants, uh, especially in the management, the financial management of the grants. So let's get going. So today's presentation will focus primarily on understanding district grants. We'll learn how to qualify and apply for district grants. We'll talk a bit about the reporting requirements. I'll spend some time on that. And we'll talk a bit about some best practices for success. I This is a slide which I believe most people are familiar with because it talks about the 7 areas of focus for Rotary International. And ideally, you want the project that you're applying for to fall within this area. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I know my colleague presenter, President Jacklyn, also has some thoughts on this slide. And so I will not have you go through this twice in this evening. But let's move on. So district grants. District grants are typically for short-term projects, a project likely to be completed within a 12-month period or maybe even shorter. And we'll talk about some timelines later. They tend to be flexible and easy to apply for, and they're much faster in action when compared to a global grant. The rigor is not as much there, but there's some basic things that you still need to adhere to, but definitely much easier than applying for a global grant. So who can apply? Of course, clubs within their respective districts, and I understand that we have some of our colleagues from District 7020. So 7020 clubs, Rotaract clubs, and Rotary clubs, you can apply within your district. And of course, 7030, you can definitely apply within your district as well. There is a qualification process, so you must qualify in that process. I'll tell you how you qualify shortly. But I understand that we have at least 14 clubs who are joining with us now who have met that process of qualification, which would have passed already, incidentally. And then I'll talk a bit about understanding the financial and reporting responsibilities, really critical aspect of the grant process. So, in terms of qualification, this process would have taken place earlier this year, The persons who represent your clubs would have attended a workshop talking about grants, both global grants and district grants. Your president would have signed an MOU, president and president elect would have signed an MOU with your respective district organizations. You would have hopefully made a donation to the annual fund. In fact, to qualify, you've had to make a donation to the annual fund. And your club must be in good standing with Rotary International, the Rotary Foundation, TRF, and the district. So, in good standing, meaning that you have paid your dues and you have been making contributions. Part of the memorandum of understanding speaks to a number of areas. And for this year, 25-26, your president and president elect would have signed off on the qualification process, which we talked about. They would have identified club officer responsibilities. I'm going to go through a bit of that shortly. The financial management plan, bank account requirements, reporting on the use of grant funds, document retention, reporting on the misuse of grant funds, and authorization and agreement. That's the contents of the memorandum that has been signed off. And here's some more detail on it. So in the application process, and President Jacklyn is going to go through some more detail on this, but you have to submit a completed application and there is a prescribed format for that. That application must describe in detail your project so that anybody who is not familiar with your project can read it and understand what you are trying to accomplish with this project, what needs in the community you are trying to satisfy. And I would implore you to identify needs that obviously the community wants, but also projects that are interesting and novel. You just don't want to do run of the mill things that everybody else is doing. Those are the types of projects that will attract the attention of the persons making the decision on the grant. Because you're competing essentially, you're competing against other clubs for scarce resources. So you want your project to stand out. You also want your budget to be clearly to for the assumptions to make sense. So when you when you design your budget and you identify costs, expenses, uh, they must align with the need that you have identified, and essentially it must be rational. It must be, in fact, let's use the terminology, it must be smart. So specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and it should have some time bound nature to it. Um, and again, you have to, the project should have clearly defined goals and outcomes that at the end of the period, you can see what you have done has delivered on the outcome that you expected. And you know, within Rotary, we're very conscious about sustainability. So you want to do a project that can be managed well into the future, that you can control it into the future, and that is impacting the community in a sustainable fashion. So those are some of the key things that you will be explaining within your project uh, proposal and your application that you're submitting. After you've done that, and it's been successful, those funds will be dispersed quickly for your use. And I'll tell you about that shortly. Actually, right now. So the MOU was signed no later than June 30th, 2025. So all persons who would have been eligible would have made this date. And for those who are hearing this for the first time, please acknowledge it because next year it will be June 30th, 2026, that if you want to be eligible for this process. So if you don't know or your president doesn't know, they will certainly learn about it, but now you're privileged to this information. Now, the next important date in this process is a month and a half away, the 30th of September 2025. So if you're thinking about applying for a district grant, now is the time for you to be, this is the right place for you to be hearing this information because you now have a month and a half to get your application in. Important date. Let's talk about some reporting requirements. After you have completed your project, you will be required to submit a final report. That final report will obviously be based on all that you have done and all that you projected in your original request. And it should include financials, a financial statement, how you have spent the funds, how you have managed the funds. It should include some pictures that tells the story, so you know you'll have to be recording as you go through the process. And of course, it should record the outcomes of the project. What have you accomplished? Those goals that you talked about, okay, we accomplished goal one, goal two, goal three, or we partially accomplished goal three, but you're going to be factual in your final report. Club officers' responsibilities. Ideally, you should appoint two members to manage the club qualification process, somebody who is going to follow this process for you, who's part of the grant writing process, who's ensuring that it's submitted on time, who's following for the proceeds as they come in. And they'll probably, that person potentially could be part of your financial management. May not necessarily need to be, because you could identify other persons for that as well, but certainly you want somebody to be your point person uh, for this activity. Ensure adherence to proper stewardship and grant management practices, and I'll talk about some of those grant management practices. But as you know, one of the hallmarks of Rotary International is that it has the outstanding reputation for how it manages its funds. It is ranked number one. It has had that ranking for a long time as one of the leading social organizations that manages its affairs well. And this actually falls under that. So the expectation of proper stewardship of the funds and proper management of your grant is cannot be understated or cannot be overstated, I should say. Very critical. And within the context of good governance, we want to ensure that there are no conflicts of interest, no conflicts of interest in who you contract to do work for you, who is signing checks versus who is making decisions on the contractors that you are identifying. For example, you want to identify perhaps if you have a contract to offer, perhaps you want three quotations to make your decision. So good governance is going to be critical in all of this. And to the extent that you could demonstrate that within your grant application, that would also be useful. So I want to spend a bit of time on, I say a bit of time, not a lot of time, but I want us to focus on financial management planning because this actually is useful not only for district grants, but for global grants as well. So useful for you to understand it. So the first thing is that mandatory is a written plan for managing foundation finances. And here are some of the elements of what that plan could look like and should look like. So it should set out you should have a standard set of accounts and accounting practice as well. You should disburse funds against invoices. So part of your policy should be that a check should not be written unless it is written against some type of invoice. Somebody has done work for you, it costs $200, they should present you an invoice for $200. You're buying exercise books, there's a cost to that. You're disbursing funds against invoices. Proper record keeping and management. I talked about this before, segregation of duties. The person who is writing the checks, you don't necessarily want that person to be making decisions on the contracts, That person is probably not also making decisions on who is going to be doing work, or the negotiation of the of what something may cost. So you want to separate those duties, so that there's good governance in the process. Part of your final report will require an accounting for all that you've done. So one good practice is monthly reconciliation, so that you know what you've spent so far, what you have left spent, how it's being spent, um, and does it tally, right? So the number of invoices you have versus what you've spent, does that tally? A simple reconciliation. Sounds complex, but all it is just adding what you have, what you spent, and check it against what your invoices that you've identified, and also that those funds have been allocated to the places that you had intended for them to be allocated. Maintenance of records. So I mentioned before that I was part of a grant that was audited by Rotary Foundation, and it was quite an intense process. They will ask for every record that you can find. They will want invoices, they will want bank statements, they will want contracts that you have made with individuals. They will want to see your checks, and how you have your reconciliations actually. So I implore you to maintain good records of all things that you are doing within the grant from start to completion. Part of this is inventory control. So if you have supplies, you ought to have good management of those supplies. What of those supplies are uh, could could be could building materials, from building materials to baking materials, food supplies. Ensure that you have a good inventory control of purchase in and as they are distributed or as they are utilized. And primary in all of this, or undergirding all of this, is to ensure that there's compliance with all local laws. So if there's VAT to be paid, or if there's some tax to be paid, or there's some levy to be to be complied with, please ensure that all laws are adhered to. That's important for the good name of Rotary, and even your own good name as well. Bank account requirements, all falling within the context of the financial management plan as well. Dedicate. So, one of the critical things is to have segregated accounts for your grant proceeds. I know because I work in the banking system that it could be difficult to open accounts, but it is highly advisable to have a separate grant account. Again, being part of a system that has been audited by Rotary Foundation, and then subsequently having to report on a grant, they are going to ask you for statements, and they will want to see statements that are not commingled with other club funds. So the best way to manage that is to have a separate account. Obviously, within the overall context of Rotary, dual signatories are the minimum. So you need at least two signatories. No one individual should be managing a club account, a grant account, any type of Rotary account. So this goes across the board. For grant funds, it is recommended a non-interest bearing or a low interest bearing account. The idea is not to be making this an investment account. And if they happen to be in a low interest bearing account, then you must account for that interest in in your reconciliation and in your financial reporting. A separate account for each grant, if possible, ideally. And again, I am aware of the realities of the region that we are in and the difficulty of opening accounts. But to the extent that you can have a separate account for each grant, that is very much advisable for the management. If you can't, then you need to have some very, very, very good recording and reporting so that you can show how those funds have been spent. Statements must be available, goes without saying, I mentioned before. and written procedures for how changing of signatories are conducted. So there's some basic financial management and bank account requirement principles that I want to make sure that you have within your processes. The final report on the use of the grant, I talked about this earlier, but a bit more detail on it. The club must adhere to all the Rotary Foundation reporting requirements. Grant reporting is a key aspect of grant management and stewardship as it forms the Rotary Foundation of the grant's progress and how funds are spent. So in this process for district funds, you're going to do an initial request and you're going to do a final report. Uh, but for your own management of the process, if you're handling it, you may want to do intermediary reports for your own sake. Certainly in global grant arena, you have to do progress reports. In this case, you will only require to do a final report. In your final report, however, you want to. So before I say that, it's important to know that the entire club is responsible for the district grant funds. So your club is responsible for it, but the special responsibility lies with the officer's name as being responsible for the grant. So you will indicate to those two officers who are responsible for the grant, and they have that responsibility. But just remember, they're acting on behalf of the entire club. So um, you're obviously going to put those in hands of people who are responsible. That report should happen no later than the 30th of June, that magic date next year, and or within a month of completion of the project. So if your project is in November of this year, you complete it, let's say November, December. By January, you should submit your completion report. Don't wait until the end of June to do it. You'll probably forget all the things that if you reported, and hopefully your recording or maintenance of records is solid. But the sooner you can do your final report, I think the better for you and the better for all concerned. So latest June 30th, but certainly within a month of the completion of the project. And what you are included in this report, a review of the objectives, the sources of funds, because not all your funds may come from grant funds, so you will want to identify where your other sources of funds are. The list of purchases, the copies of receipts, photographs of the event, copies of any newspaper or social media coverage, any PI public image that you have undertaken in the process. So important for you to take note of this page. I'm not going to go too heavily into document retention. Suffice it to say that you need to keep all your key documents, statements, any contracts that you have, and so on. And I kind of spent some time on that before. The last slide that I want to share with you is on reporting of misuse of grant funds. I have to give this piece of information because it's critical. So the club must report any and re- potential and or real misuse or mismanagement of grant funds to the district. Right. So if you had some kind of infraction or infringement or any kind of issue, please be upfront and report it to the district. It's important. And this reporting forces an environment in the club that that the club does not tolerate the misuse of grant funds. So it means that you are living up to what we as a district expect. And it's part of that good governance that I spoke about before. And the last bit, an agreement between the club and the District 1730 acknowledges the club will undertake measures to ensure proper implementation of grant activities and proper management of foundation grant funds. And Graham reliably informed me that your last session talked about the source of grant funds, of which we are, how we contribute to it. But I just want to make the point that as a region, we are net beneficiaries of grant funds. So over the years, we have received more grant funding than we've actually contributed to. And so with that, I want to encourage you to continue to contribute because the more that we all contribute, the more we can all be recipients of district uh, DDF, district funding, district grant funding, and of course, it also supports our global grant funding. With that, I close my presentation and I will await for any questions in the later segment. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, AG Paul. A very thorough presentation. Sure is more than what people were expecting regarding the details about the district grant application process. And I hope persons have been taking their notes. We will strive to share some of the details with you in due course after the presentation. But stay tuned now for further information about applying for external grants. As we said, 14 clubs have um, been eligible due to their donations to the Rotary Foundation and their signing of the MOU for this year. But for those clubs who have not been so fortunate, um, there are other avenues for you to apply for funding. And also those 14 clubs could also explore other opportunities as well for funding, depending on your activities within the club. So to present on external funding, we now have President Jackie, who is going to specifically present on unlocking external funding, practical guidelines for securing grants beyond Rotary.
AG Paul, CRR Crystal, Director Graham, fellow Rotarians, Rotaractors, and guests, a very good evening to you. It is my privilege this evening to present to you, as Director Graham said, on unlocking external funding. So this refers to funding outside of the district, outside of global grants, outside of our internal fundraising activities, outside of our sponsorships. You can hear me well? Okay. Outside of the sponsorships that we get from individual entities or companies. So this is speaking directly to external grants. The outline for this presentation is as follows. Why external funding? The sources of external grants, key principles of grant writing, some of which AG Paul would have referred to in his previous presentation, because there are some similarities between the district and grant writing for external grants. We will then go on to steps to success, common pitfalls to avoid, the role of Rotary and our Rotaractors, of course, a few tips that I would like to give based on what we have experienced as we applied for external grants. We will then go through two case studies, one from the public sector based here in Barbados, a government grant that we recently applied for, and the experience that we had there, and then also a private sector grant that we recently came across, just to give you the examples of how they may differ, but also some similarities. And then we will move on to the conclusions. I ask you to bear with me with the voice in case I need to cough or drink some water, just put that little disclaimer before I go ahead. So why external funding? As I mentioned before, there are a number of avenues for us to receive funding within Rotary and Rotaract. We know that we have our internal fundraisers, we know that we have our sponsorships, and as we have been encouraged as of recent, we have our district grants. But the reason why we should consider external funding is that it obviously expands our reach beyond Rotary. There is funding out there to be obtained from external sources. It increases the resources that we have available to us, not only financial, but also human resources. And you will learn a little bit more about this as we go on. But it basically increases the net from which we may obtain funding for our projects. It allows us as clubs to build partnerships with not just other Rotary clubs, but with the government, with NGOs, and with the private sector. And this is essential to the sustainability of our projects, as seen in the next point. The more resources we have, the more impactful we can be, and the more sustainable these projects can be as we go forward. It also opens the doors to larger multi-year initiatives. If we are able to show that we can use these funds properly, execute projects well, we open ourselves to having continued relationships with these funding agencies to obviously execute these projects over a longer period of time. And by having increased resources, obviously, we hope to have an increased impact on the communities that we serve. We get to serve more persons in need, we get to have larger projects, and we get to really see the power of Rotary at work when we have strong partnerships. So we have several sources of external grants, as you can see here. We have the government agencies, or what we will call the public sector, both national and regional. We have our private foundations or private corporations, and these are usually through their CSR or corporate social responsibility departments and their philanthropic arms. We have local businesses and partnerships. So you have the businesses within your own communities, within your island, within your domains that you can approach for grants. And then we have international organizations. Obviously, this is an entirely different ballgame when you try to get grants from the international organizations, but we will go through this. And these include the UN agencies, the EU, ambassadors, and embassies that may be present within your islands. For us, we have embassies such as the US Embassy, the British Embassy, Japanese, Chinese. You just have to know what is around you. And believe it or not, we also have individual donors, very philanthropic individuals that will be willing to support the projects that we have, but we have to know who they are and how to approach them. So we move on to key principles of grant writing for external grants. One of the first things that I will say to you is that it must align with the funder's priorities. Yes, we know we have to match the 7 pillars of Rotary International. We're all familiar with these, and you can see them in the photo here. You have peace building and conflict prevention, disease prevention and treatment, water, sanitation and hygiene, community economic development, basic education and literacy, support the environment, and maternal and child health. One thing I would like you to recognize is that even though we have these specific areas of focus, and the funders may have their own specific areas of focus, we have to be able to match them. They may use different terminology than us. So instead of saying basic education and literacy, you might see learning and development or training and development. Instead of seeing disease prevention, you may see healthy lifestyles. So we have to be able to match the donor language with the pillars of Rotary International as well, so that we all achieve our broad objectives. In terms of the objectives for the grants, we have to use clear, smart, and measurable objectives, because they want to see how we will be measuring this impact, how we will be achieving what we set out to achieve. So we should make them as clear and concise as possible, so that there's no question in what we are trying to achieve. We must also have a strong community impact or focus. You must have a compelling story. Why is this necessary? Who is it going to impact? What will we achieve? What communities will be served? Who will be better because of this intervention? So we use all of that information to tell a very compelling story when we write that grant or the letter supporting that grant, because some grant agencies do ask for a letter supporting the application. So this is even outside of the application. The next thing we must have is a realistic budget and a sustainability plan to show how this will occur over time. Realistic budget mean you go there, you get your quotations, your invoicing, you basically decipher what the cost of this project will be, not just from your head, but through realistic research. And you show that you put in the research. Not all applications ask for quotations, but if you do have them, it helps to strengthen your story. And one thing that I would like to say in terms of grant writing, we must always showcase Rotary's credibility and our ability to execute good projects or impactful projects. And once you write this into your grant writing, it makes for a more compelling story, as well as the way we should be allowed these grants. In terms of steps to success, I have a few steps here. First, identify opportunities. The grants will not just fall into your lap. You will not just get in your email all of a sudden, apply to this grant. You have to go out there and really do your research, do your networking in order to be more aware of the opportunities that are available. And this means that sometimes you have to get out there physically, to go and network with these persons. We really have to work hard towards leveraging these partnerships so that the projects can be more impactful and the resources can be shared in a way that we make best use of these resources. And as I mentioned before, you have to ensure that your project matches the donor's area of interest. As you can see in the photo to the right, this is an example from right here in Barbados. It's called the Sandy Lane Charitable Trust. It is a very well-known trust in Barbados that does a number of initiatives. But as you can see at the very bottom, it says this is not about us, it is about children. So obviously, if you are going to the Sandy Lane Charitable Trust, you know that your project has to be an intervention for children, or at least under the age of 18. So you wouldn't go to them to say, have an initiative on literacy in adults, because this is not something that they usually work with.
President, I'm gonna allow you to take a little break to get some water.
Yeah, thank you.
In that case, you must do a needs assessment. You have to look at who you want to be your beneficiary. You would want to determine what their needs are by speaking with the persons involved in that organization. And because what you think their needs might be, they might have a source for those needs already, and it just has not come about as yet. So something might be in the works, but you might maybe visit their location and say, "Hey, it seems like they need they're building these painting. I'm gonna go and get funding for paints and brushes and develop an entire project around painting the building when they have already sourced somebody to do it."
To do that, yeah.
That's a very simple example, but a needs assessment is absolutely necessary. Hand it back over to you, President.
But thank you, I appreciate that. It's a break. I was struggling. So thank you for recognizing. And that is the next point, the importance of having a community needs assessment, as you so rightfully went through just now. So it is essential to the formulation of the initiative. And this is something that I tell my club at all times. When you are forming an intervention, an initiative, a project, we do not want to go in as Rotarians and Rotaractors and prescribe what we think is best. So if we follow this simple phrase here, nothing about us without us, it tells us that any intervention that we plan must have the inputs of the community that we intend to serve. And this will help us to avoid a lot of problems in the future. So moving on with our steps to success, as with any application, I encourage you to read the instructions. Most of the time, all of the guidance that you need, the instructions, the directions, they are right there in the applications, but we fail to read. So I would encourage you to put a team together to go through these instructions so that everything is clear before we even attempt to fill out the application. Using these instructions, we should work towards developing strong proposals using the community needs assessment so that we will have proposals that are clear, they outline the solution and the proposed outcomes for the grant, the entity offering the grants. I encourage you to also use the language of the donor. As I mentioned before, yes, we have our own language within Rotary, but we have to know how to pivot and how to incorporate the language of the donor so that we're speaking the same and it is very clear what we're trying to achieve. The next point is very important. Proofread your proposal. Believe it or not, minor mistakes can throw off these committees because it shows that you're not paying attention to detail. So I would encourage you to have someone outside of your grant committee proofread the proposal. And this is a light editing. This is not to correct your objectives or not to correct your rationale, but to just go in there and look for the minor errors in your editing. As you can see here, if something is to be bold, if it's supposed to be a capital, if there's a spelling mistake, so that you put your best foot forward when you write this proposal. And something that I will also never forget, where possible, seek legal advice before you send off the application and also before you sign any contracts, because you have to know what you are holding yourself to in terms of reporting, in terms of spending the money, in terms of timelines, because they will hold you to whatever is placed in that contract. Legal advice could come from lawyers within your own Rotary Club or lawyers within your Rotaract club or lawyers within your Rotary club. We have professionals within your Rotary club that I'm sure would also be very willing to offer guidance. Continuing with steps to success, ensure that you submit all documents required. For some, an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, is required, especially for the public sector grants. And this shows the relationship between the different entities and clearly shows who is responsible for what. In many circles, it is said that MOUs are not legally binding, but they help to guide how you execute the project and show clearly the responsibilities of the different parties within the project. And finally, you must show how you're going to measure and report on your impact, how this project influenced the communities, how many people were served, and this helps the entities to also decide if they will continue with the funding or if they encourage you with another cycle. And now, common pitfalls to avoid. This is very important. We want to avoid using generic one-size-fits-all proposals, ChatGPT proposals. Yes, I know AI helps us a lot, but believe it or not, the funding agencies, the trustees, the boards, they do recognize when we use the generic proposals, and this can be a turnoff. You want to make sure that your proposal reflects who you are as a club and what you are trying to achieve. So whereas these proposals might be helpful, I would say just use them as a guideline, but not to use them as your entire proposal that you send to the grant agencies. Avoid long-winded objectives in research. They always tell you to be smart. So use short, concise, measurable objectives. Ensure that you get your treasurer or your treasury team to review the budgets to ensure that they add up. Try not to make these types of mistakes because it already shows that you're not managing the funds well because of the errors in the budgets. Where possible, avoid the use of Rotary jargon, abbreviations that the grant agencies might not be familiar with. I know sometimes we're tempted to write RC Barbados South, but what does the RC mean? We can't assume that the agencies will know what we're referring to. We can refer to TRF. We can refer to PHF, but what does it really mean? But if you do feel the need to include these abbreviations, I would say to include them in an appendix so that it's very clear what we're speaking about. Next, this happened to us in the Rotary Club of Barbados South. Incorrect signatures. Who can sign? Is it the trustees? Is it the president? Is it the treasurer? And another mistake. Well, it wasn't really a mistake. They thought it was a mistake. Is it a digital signature that is required, or is it a manual signature that is required? We once made an application to the United Nations for a small grant through their GEF fund, Global Environmental Fund. And when we sent in the application, it was sent back to us and they said, we do not want a digital signature. We did in fact follow the instructions. It was a manual signature, but the then president, Brian Lashley, his signature was so pretty that they thought it was digital. So these are little instructions that you still have to read. Always read the fine print and make sure that even something as simple as a signature is correct. Digital versus manual, and who can actually sign. And finally, avoid late and incomplete submissions, because in most cases, this makes the applications null and void and negates all of the hard work that you would have done up to this point. Continuing, we have common pitfalls to avoid: ignoring financial requirements. So here in Barbados, and for all the UN grants, the private, the public sector, what we have found is that all agencies will ask for evidence of registration as charities or nonprofit organizations or non-governmental organizations. Now, in speaking to Director Graham, I was told that not all Rotaract clubs have embarked on this as yet. But I would say that in terms of external grant funding, this is essential to the success of your applications, because in many cases, they will not process applications without this basic information, and that is the evidence of your registration as a charity, a nonprofit, or a non-governmental organization. So this is something that we may have to start looking into, and as Rotarians also, where we can possibly help our Rotaract clubs to bring themselves up to this standard. You have to have, as AG Paul mentioned, your bank accounts and your audits being done to show how your funds have been used. You have to identify your signatories. And in some cases, the agencies also ask for KYC, or Know Your Customer forms. And this means that they can ask for information from the president, the treasurer, anyone in the club really, where they ask for your proof of address, if you have any conflicts of interest to declare. And so these are things that we have to be aware of when we are submitting these applications. But this one for sure is essential, and that is the registration as a charity or nonprofit, because you may not be able to even get past the initial application without it. And now moving on to the role of Rotary and Rotaractors in seeking this external grants. First, as I mentioned, we have to go out there and seek opportunities. They will not just fall into our laps. We have to be active. One thing I recognize about Rotaractors is that you have all the energy and drive in the world, whereas Rotarians tend to be a little bit more sedate. So I would say to use this energy, use this drive to go out there and seek these opportunities, form your networks, form your connections, go out there and talk, let people know about what you're trying to achieve, and it will become so much easier in learning about the opportunities. As Rotarians, we also have to lend our expertise in proposal writing and provide the skills that we have to our Rotaractors: legal advice, project management, monitoring. A number of us are experienced and will be most willing to assist. And this also helps to strengthen the credibility of your applications by saying that you're a Rotaract club and we know how to do this. We have years of executing service projects. A few tips. As I mentioned before, the importance of networking. Invite these agencies to your events and ensure that you attend theirs where possible. You, in this digital age, you sign up for their newsletters, their events, follow on social media platforms, because this is where you usually get to see the ads first. ask to be added to mailing lists. This is not automatic, or you can go on the website and sign up for the mailing list. And one very important fact, undertake training in grant management on the Learning Center. We have a wealth of seminars on the Learning Center on myrotary.org that will effectively teach you how to manage these grants as well. It may be tailored to district grants, but you can also apply the basic facts to external grants as well. So we now move on to two case studies. I don't expect you to read all of this at all. I just wanted to give you some examples. And this is one drawn from the Ministry of Labor here in Barbados. And this was a grant for the third sector. So the third sector speaks specifically to charities, NGOs, NPOs. I said not to use abbreviations, forgive me. Charities, non-governmental organizations, and nonprofits. So this grant was specifically for the third sector. And as you can see here, one of the very first parameters that they have stated is that you have to be a registered charity under the Charities Act. And the date of registration must be no less than 3 years before the grant application deadline. So it's very specific. You must be located in Barbados and you must have a memorandum of understanding. So as you can see, they're very clear in who is eligible through this criteria. They then go on to specify the types of interventions. So you have seminars and workshops, capacity building, which speaks to learning again and training, institutional strengthening activities, advocacy, and research. So you know that this grant is specific to training, learning, capacity building. So you will not go to this third sector grant and apply for infrastructure or machinery or anything of that sort because it's specific to learning. And this is where I mentioned that you have to know what they're trying to achieve before you apply. You can see there that they're asking not just for an end report, but also for a midterm progress report. Yes, these grants do take a substantial amount of work, which is why we recommend that you have a team in place rather than a single individual. And for this one, they're asking for actions completed in the reporting period, actions planned for the next reporting period, an updated schedule based on if you encountered any issues reports, and financial updates. Are you sticking to the budget? What is the projected expenditure as you move forward? And then we have the final report. You can see here, again, how specific they are. Outputs achieved, financial report, updated schedule, lessons learned. And at the very bottom, you can see the beneficiary shall agree to be monitored for a period of 1 year, which means that you have to retain your records in the event that they ask to carry out a financial audit. And this was mentioned by AG Paul in terms of retaining your records, because they do have the right to audit you to see how you have been spending the funds that they have granted you. And this public sector grant, it was advertised on the Government Information Services. Very simple, so it's easy to miss. So I will also advise you to follow your government channels because this is what they use to officially send out calls for grants and calls for applications. We now move on to a case study, which involves the private sector. So this is a very recent advertisement from the Barbados Public Workers Cooperative Credit Union Limited, very long name. And this is their CSR arm, as I mentioned before, that is called the Legacy Foundation. So this is a very colorful application that was put out on their social media. It catches the eye immediately. You know, your idea can change Barbados. And it is an open call for grants, as you can see, and it tells you who can apply. So we see nonprofits, charities, community groups, schools, grassroots groups, or individuals with an impactful project. What we do not fund, personal financial aid, political, social, or recreational clubs, fundraising goals or sports events, beautification only projects. So you can see very clearly what they are seeking to achieve in this very colorful ad. How to apply. Submit a Legacy Foundation application for funding and supporting documents to this email address. Now, you could think that maybe you just write up your own proposal and send it to this address, but that's actually not so. When you go to the website, you realize that there's an entire application to be filled out. So this is another trap that we should not fall for. Don't just assume that you're sending your own proposal. Most of the times they have their own application that they want you to fill. And when we went to the website, we found this application along with a number of guidelines. So you can see here, the primary focus of this Legacy Foundation, very broad-based, learning, wellness, and empowerment. So as Rotarians, Rotaractors, we have to see how we can fit our projects within those very broad-based initiatives. And then they tell you the evaluation criteria, the ability of the project to directly impact the targeted group, a clear evaluation process, the ability of the project to supply relevant services, sustainability of the programs, and the track record of the organization. And they have a note at the bottom. Please note that funding approved for all projects, which include the purchase of equipment or supplies, the foundation remits payment directly to the vendor. So the funding will actually not go through your club, but will go directly to the vendor. You still benefit, but these are all things that we have to know. We have to pay attention to the details. And then finally, to apply for funding, the funding form must be completed and submitted to the foundation, along with some other guidelines. But what you will find is that the private sector grants sometimes can be less stringent than public sector or governmental grants. But the most stringent of all, for sure, are those United Nations grants. I think those probably are up there with global grants. And we can see here required documents. Again, I wanted to show you that the first thing you see is a copy of the certificate of incorporation or registration. So I just want to use this opportunity to encourage the different Rotaract clubs, where possible, to try to get this done as soon as possible so that we can expand our reach in terms of grants and external grant funding. And so now I will conclude this presentation. So as we know, external grants allow us to have access to more resources, not just financial, but human as well. As we go about formulating our external grants, we must be mindful that they should have a clear vision and alignment, not just with Rotary International's pillars, but also with the organization's pillars. You must have complete and targeted application, with all of your supporting documents, because otherwise you run the risk of your application being rejected. External grants help us to form strong partnerships with other entities outside of Rotary, thereby increasing our reach and our impact. And Rotary really and truly provides the trust and the credibility, and this is something that we should leverage as we go about making these applications. And that is it for me, Director Graham. I thank you for listening so intensely.
Thank you very much, President Jackie, for another very thorough presentation. Um, I like the case studies and the live examples of the types of organizations that you could apply to. I am aware of entities that have, you mentioned the Legacy Foundation. I'm aware of entities that have applied to the Legacy Foundation, and I'm told that the process is like a 3-month process of between application and approval, and has a series of interviews as part of the process. So I don't say this to discourage the clubs. I say this to bear that in mind as you apply for I'm going to group them all together, external funding, because President Jackie would have mentioned that the private sector funding entities are the easier ones of the three that she mentioned. So bear that in mind as you plan for the year or as you plan for the next year, because some of these processes may take quite a while, and you might not have everything ready as you apply or as you go through the process of being approved. So it may be a case where your finance director would be applying for the following year. So it's also a form of continuity and sustainability planning. I'm going to jump directly into any questions that persons may have at this point. Feel free to type your questions in the chat or raise your hand to be acknowledged. What I would do until we get a few questions, ask about the value of the Rotary Service Project Showcase. And this is for either AG Paul or President Jackie. We are going to be doing a social media campaign on it. So maybe you can help me in compiling some information for that. But what are your opinions of the use of the Rotary Service Project Showcase um, for funding your projects as well as an alternative to the two that were presented?
Well, maybe I can start. First of all, I think the Rotary Showcase is good for clubs to, well, there are two sides of it. One, for you to showcase your project. So it's a way to put them out there, have people know that you're active and you're doing things. But it's also a source of information where you can see what other people have done and you can learn from it. You just hit on a piece though that I really didn't actively think about, which makes your social media campaign probably useful, in that you could send donors or potential people who want to partner with you to the showcase and say, look, this is the work of Rotary. So not only my club, but this is what other clubs have done, and this is the kind of work that you could partner with to elevate your brand. So I think the showcase is an excellent exhibition for Rotarian projects and Rotaract projects, of course. I'll pause and let Jacqueline go.
Hello. I was just putting it in the chat. I was saying that I believe that the Rotary Showcase is essential to increasing our visibility. One thing that I read up to today, I believe from our Rotary International Director, is that Rotarians are very good at executing projects and we do them well, but we're very, very quiet about it. And so I believe that the showcase helps us to increase our visibility, not just within Rotary, but outside of Rotary. And it really demonstrates the power of Rotary and how well we can do projects. And this can also help us to attract funding and partners. And the Rotary Showcase also allows us to demonstrate a need. So you can indicate what needs you may have for your project and therefore attract potential partners. So it increases the visibility of our projects, both in a positive way, but also allows us to attract partners. So I would say that we should make the best use of it. That's a very long-winded way of saying that.
How important is it to have a good presence on, say, your website or your social media when creating these application documents and submitting them? How important um, is your public image aspect of the club? Does it factor in at all?
Of course, it factors in. This is the age of social media and everybody wanting bite-sized information and information immediately. So if you have a presence on social media, the information is readily available and persons don't have to fight out for that information, you know, and they'll be more willing to support and they can see how you will get the message out as well because you're not hiding it. Most people, when they partner with you, they want this to be communicated to the public at large. And it's usually written into the contracts as well. So yes, you should leverage your social media, your public image to promote the project.
Yeah, not much to add to that. Branding is
Yeah.
vital. Um, there's a lot of equity. As a matter of fact, the difference between the the success of a brand sometimes is the strength of its brand equity and not even the quality of the product sometimes. So to the extent that you can sell your brand well, you can represent your brand well. Corporates like that because they think that their brand can benefit from your leverage and the spaces that you can get into.
And my final question would be on conflicts of interest. You spoke about conflicts of interest in your presentation, Paul. Um, there was a side comment to my WhatsApp about highlighting conflicts of interest which might benefit persons within the club. While you're I saw that look, President Jackie. So you have someone in the club who may be a service provider, who may be associated with the beneficiary in some way. How do you um deal with a situation like that? Who,
Reconcile. I have to be factual. I mean, this is a legitimate question and concern. I mean, we are in clubs, especially in the Rotary context, where you have business people. I mean, there are business people offering services of all varieties and kinds. I mean, even in the context of, let's say, Barbados, so across the three Rotary clubs, you probably could find every industry provider. It is natural for you to use the members of your club, but I think what needs to be clear in your process is that you are not using the highest bidder in that circumstance. So, if there's an alternate provider that can give you the same quality at a better price, it beholds you, particularly in a grant situation, because you will have to defend that in a grant situation, not to give favor to somebody who is within the family of Rotary. Um, there's a lot of sensitivity about the use of public funds for
Mhm.
Rotarian benefit,
Yeah.
and to the extent that it is a service that we require that a Rotarian is offering, we need to be very clear that that's the best offer that we are taking on. I think that's the way you go about it. Yes, Jacqueline, I see you. President Jack.
I was trying to find the raise hand. I also wanted to mention that you can declare your potential sources of conflict from before. So
Mhm.
if there are situations where Rotarians are all over the place. There are situations where in your club you can have a Rotarian that is also a member of a board of an entity that you want to work with. So in the MOU or in the application, what you can do to avoid this is declare the potential sources of conflict so that it is obvious to the person granting the funds, and then they can decide if they want to continue or not. But it's not something that you have hidden.
I love that, President Jacqueline.
Yes.
I agree. Yeah.
President
Transparent. What you're saying is transparency, I suppose, is
Yes.
what you're saying. I like that. Appreciate it.
President Jackie, I didn't don't recall if it was mentioned in your presentation that the external sources of funding entities might require a separate bank account. I know for sure it was mentioned in AG Paul's presentation. Um, Opening a bank account in our region is very difficult,
Very difficult. Yeah.
especially for charities. What is another way that clubs could keep their funds separate or easily reconcile their funds to meet the criteria for both Rotary and external entities?
Well, I can answer from our club. We have an account associated with the charitable trust, and then we have an account separate, which is for club administration. No, we do not have a separate account for district grants. These funds come through the charitable trust. But what we have is very strict accounting and reporting. So you see specific lines to specific projects. So even though we do not have separate accounts, it all comes down to your accounting. Agent Paul, you can correct me, you're the financial person.
Yeah,
But
no, I'm mouthing
yes,
what you're saying. You're saying the right thing.
okay, okay. So we make sure that we have lines assigned to the different projects and grants so that there's
Mhm.
no abuse of the funds or transfer of the funds between projects.
Yeah. I couldn't add to that. Yeah. So some people may use accounting programs, QuickBooks and so on. I mean, it's probably advisable to get an accounting package that would make life easier for you, so you can do that type of line item management.
All right. And final question. If having gotten the grant and you are unable to complete the project for whatever reason, what do you advise the clubs to do? You got the funding, you sent in this grand proposal, might not have been grand either. You sent in this proposal, you got the funding, maybe the funds came too late, maybe something happened and you were unable to complete the project. Do you redivert the funds? Do you modify the project? Or do you just stop and hope for the best that the entity does not realize?
President Jacklyn, you want to take that one? I think
I
you.
would say, you made me laugh. I would say communicate, communicate and be upfront. Most of these entities will ask for a midterm report or an update. You use this opportunity to let them know that things are not going as planned and then propose a way forward. But the essential part is to communicate and not wait until last minute and then be found out that you were not able to manage the funds properly.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. I would add to that because it was a scenario that I was faced with in the past. Be, if you you sent in a proposal, this is all hypothetical. Let me not say that I dealt with it in the past. You sent in a proposal and the funding was a little less than you expected because that would happen in some cases. My advice as well to you would be to seek funding to enhance the funds that you were given rather than downscale your project. Um, so that the second time around when you may be going to apply, you will have a track record of using the funds efficiently and you would have some sort of sweat equity in the game for sourcing your own funding as well. Um, what I will do now, being conscious of the time, is invite President Jackie and AG Paul to give final comments on their various topics before we close.
I'll go first. First of all, thanks very much for putting on this very necessary program. You have, my math is not going to help me, 11 days in August and then 30 days in September or something like that to complete your district request for funding. So I would say get on it right away. Um, get some exciting projects. There's money out there for you in the district, so make sure that you are part of it. Have something nice and fun that people and that the community requires or needs. And I would say above all, make sure that your stewardship is above uh, being called into repute. Just make sure you dot your I's, cross your T's, have your records, and be able to show all that you've done. And I think in the age that we're in, computers and so on, you don't have to store it in a drawer. You could store it in a file somewhere. So it should be much easier to do that. So My final comments is good luck on your year. I wish you very well and best wishes. So have a good night.
Well,
Yes.
okay. Good evening again, everyone. I just want to thank you for this opportunity to present to you tonight. I hope that everything was clear, and I do remain available should you have any questions. I just want to impress upon you the power of external grants in terms of increasing our reach, having access to more financial resources. But obviously, these do come with certain conditions. I would encourage you, where possible, to for the clubs that have not registered as yet, where possible to register as charities, NGOs, nonprofits with the different agencies within your countries because it ensures that so much more is accessible to you. Um, Formulate your teams, work on your grants, make sure that they're addressing a specific need that has been identified within your communities. And let us use the power of Rotary to do the best work that we possibly can. As in all things, service above self. And I do wish you all the best in your future endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, on behalf of the Rotary Foundation Committee, I'd like to thank AG Paul and President Jackie for um, jumping onto this like nothing. You asked and you answered as soon as I asked and said, yes, we get it done. And it was a very thorough presentation by each of you. I'm sure that the participants here at one point we had about 92 persons on the call. I'm sure that all of them would have learned something and will be taking back this information to better themselves for their presentations of district grant proposals to the district and also any other proposals to any other sources of funding in their communities, all with the goal of helping their communities, helping the beneficiaries in their various areas. I want to highlight the support of my committee, Shanika Walcott, Shanice Samaru, of course, Scott Chandler, and my committee's consultant, PDRR, Christina Harris. And I also want to highlight the our DRR, Crystal Mohammed, and the DRR from District 7020, Mikhail Remor. Thank you to the 7030 and the 7020 family for joining us this evening. And if you have any concerns, any questions, feel free to reach out via the WhatsApp group that we have or via my email address, which is rotariangraham@gmail.com. And I will direct those concerns to the presenters this evening and get a response to you as soon as I can. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and have a good remainder of your evening.
Bye.